Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 27 on King Henry and his ministers. And this video, ladies and gentlemen, it's all about the impact of the dissolution of the monasteries. Now, we've seen in the previous videos, by 1540 there were no monasteries at all left in England that hadn't been dissolved or ruined or destroyed. Now, what impact did this have on England and English society? Who were the winners? Who were the losers? That's what this video is all about. Well, let's start first of all with the man who actually carried out Henry's policy, Thomas Cromwell, the chief minister. Ladies and gentlemen, as we know, for Thomas Cromwell, the dissolution was one of the last things that he actually organised for Henry VIII, because you may remember 28th of July 1540 Cromwell had a little accident. Of course, Cromwell was executed, so you could say despite all his good work he was a loser from the dissolution of the monasteries. Now let's have a look at winners and losers. First of all, the winners. Ladies and gentlemen, winners are grinners. Hey, the winners. First of all, King Henry himself. He was a winner, a great winner from the dissolution of the monasteries in many different ways. Firstly, financially. His income rose from about £100,000 per year to £240,000. Henry had become even richer. As well as the money, he also got more land, which, as I'll mention in a minute, he was able to sell off to the nobility. This extra money meant that Henry didn't have to go and tax the people as much. This, of course, increased his popularity. So for Henry, it's a win. Also for Henry, he has got more power. He's emerged from the dissolution of the monasteries with even more authority. Opposition to Henry's religious control of the church was diminished. It decreased as a result of the dissolution of the monasteries. So Henry, therefore, is a winner. He's a grinner. Who else won? Well, the second group, the nobles. Many nobility and other gentry, rich families, they got the chance to increase the amount of land that they owned. They got extra land, monastic land, either as a gift from King Henry or able to buy it very, very cheaply from King Henry. Henry's bribing them, in other words. So this is good news for the nobles. It's a double bonus, because now they've got extra land, they can farm extra land and increase their wealth even more. They are growing their profits. So they are the second group of winners. Now the third and the final group of winners from the dissolution of the monasteries were the Protestant reformers. Now we've seen that poor old Cromwell, he didn't get the chance to celebrate his success because he was executed. But other Protestant reformers, men like Thomas Cranmer, they were delighted at the dissolution of the monasteries. Can you think why? Well, they're Protestants. The monasteries were a symbol of the Catholic Church. So getting rid of the monasteries is showing the decline in the power of the Catholic Church. The monasteries, the symbol of this power, they have been removed. It was another step to establishing the Reformation, the Church of England. So there we have it. Three main winners, grinners. King Henry, the nobles, Protestant reformers. But if there are winners, ladies and gentlemen, there have to be losers. So, who didn't do very well from the dissolution of the monasteries? Who ended up sad? losers? Well, of course, at the most basic level, the monks and the nuns have lost the place where they lived. They have lost a home, a roof over their head. That's at the most basic. But we need to analyse this in a bit more detail. So let's have a look. First of all, monks did better than the nuns overall. There were about 8,000 monks in the monasteries. About 6,500 of them did manage to find other jobs in the church. Many of the monks got a pension, a small pension. If you were a chief monk or an abbot, you actually got a better pension. For example, a man called William Thornton, he ended up with a pension of £260 per year, which was a very good sum. But that wasn't the norm, ladies and gentlemen. Most monks had to make do on £5 or £10 a year. But if you didn't get a job and you haven't got much of a pension, some monks actually did have to become beggars. They really had become the losers. Some of them, maybe if they didn't agree with Henry's religious reforms, for example, Richard Whiting from Glastonbury, not the festival, Glastonbury, Richard Whiting was executed. So some monks also were executed, the ultimate losers. So monks didn't do very well from the dissolution of the monasteries. Not surprising, really. It was their home, and now they've been removed. What about nuns? There were about 2,000 nuns. They are also losers. Got to remember, even when the nunneries, the convents were closed, nuns were not allowed to marry. Well, how are they going to live? How are they going to survive without money? Many nuns could not find work. Many of them had a very low or poor pension, £2 per annum. Some were lucky enough to go back to their families and the families might look after them. But again, here we see the losers. Some nuns did have to resort to begging. So we've seen two groups of losers. Monks, nuns. Here's a third group, ladies and gentlemen. The Catholics. The dissolution of the monasteries was a big blow to their power, their prestige. It was a big blow because some of their beliefs could no longer be carried out. Remember, they used to pay the monks to pray for dead relatives, chantries, if you remember, prayers for the dead. They were often said in monasteries. Well, there's no monasteries anymore. So an important belief of their faith has been destroyed. The Catholic Church itself has lost a powerful symbol. The monasteries were a sign of their power, and now they've gone. A fourth group of losers. There does seem to be quite a few losers, ladies and gentlemen. In society, we are looking at the poor and the sick. If you remember one of the jobs of the monasteries, they used to look after poor and sick people. They often had what were called infirmaries, our modern day hospitals. Cromwell, before he had his appointment with the axe, one of Cromwell's aims of the dissolution was to use the money, spend the wealth on things like schools, hospitals, help for the poor. Now you could argue that that was a good idea, and indeed some schools were set up in places like Bristol and Ely. 2 colleges in Oxford and Cambridge were actually set up. But most of the money raised from the dissolution of the monasteries was spent on defence, preparation for Henry in case England was attacked by Catholic countries like France and Spain. So you could argue that although the aim was to help the poor and the sick, that didn't really happen in enough detail. There wasn't enough spent. So you could argue that the poor and the sick also were losers. Another group. Remember I talked about land before, and I said that the nobles, the gentry, the rich people, they actually got more land. When the monastic land was sold off, many of these new landlords, or increased land for the landlords, they were not really very nice people. They were only in it for money. They were bad landlords. Therefore, they wanted to maximize their profits. How would you do that? Simple. Increase the rent on this land. Now, if you're a tenant farmer and you've been working on the land when it had been owned by the monks, and now you've got a new landlord and the price of the rent has gone up, that's not good for the tenant farmers. If they couldn't pay, they were kicked off the land. Losers. Even if they still could pay, they're paying extra rent. Losers. Many of these landlords stopped growing crops like wheat or barley, and instead they moved, they changed and used the land for sheep farming. No to crops, yes to sheep. Why would they do that? Well, have a think about it. It took far more workers to grow the crops than it did to look after some sheep. So for the landlord, sheep farming was cheaper. But of course, many people are losing their jobs on the land. If they're not needed to work the land, if 10 people work in one field to grow some wheat, how many people does it need in one field to look after some sheep? Not 10. So people would become unemployed. Can we see what's happening? There's a rise in poverty. Just at the time when the monasteries would help the poor and sick, there isn't the monasteries there to help these poor. So many people have to become beggars, or vagrants as they were known. Many people became homeless and wandered around. So we do see that the dissolution of the monasteries in some ways did not help English society. Imagine talking to a tenant farmer. Say, oh, by the way, Bob, how's your business doing now that the monasteries have been dissolved? They got rid of them. Has the dissolution improved your life? What would a farmer say? Remember, he's probably got to do sheep farming instead of crops. Maybe he's poorer now. So this sheep farmer would say, what are you asking me if my life's got better? He'd say, you must be joking, or you must be barking mad. Sorry about that. But the point is an important one. Many of the tenant farmers, many of the workers on the land were losers as a result of the dissolution of the monasteries. And the final group, everyone. Because it was a cultural loss. It was almost like cultural vandalism. Many of the monasteries had had rather lovely, beautiful works of art, books, stained glass windows. Well, many of these were destroyed. Yes, the king and the nobles did keep some of the art, but a lot of it was lost. So there was a cultural loss as well for the whole country. So there we have it. Winners, Henry, the nobles, the Protestant reformers. Losers, monks, nuns, Catholics, the poor, the farmers. As ever, in history, there's two sides to the story. So the dissolution of the monasteries resulted in some winners and some losers. Now, just before we finish, if you remember some of the previous videos, one of the reasons why Henry decided to dissolve the monasteries was that some of them had actually supported a rebellion against King Henry, known as the Pilgrimage of Grace. Well, what was that all about? Our next videos, ladies and gentlemen, will analyse the Pilgrimage of Grace and see how that fits in with the story. As ever, I hope it's been useful. All the best now. See you soon.